My name is Abigail Johnson, and for most of my adult life, I've lived with the burden of being seen as someone I'm not. Not a villain necessarily, but not a welcome presence either. The day I married Daniel, I knew I wasn't just marrying a man. I was stepping into the life of a grieving widower with a teenage daughter who had no space left in her heart for anyone but her late mother. And for the next 2 decades, no matter what I did, I remained his second wife. Not a stepmom. Not a partner in the eyes of his daughter, just the woman who came after. Her name is Rachel, and for 20 years she made sure I never forgot where I stood. Daniel was my second marriage. I met him when I was 37, newly single, working as a fundraiser at a nonprofit gala where he was one of the keynote speakers. He'd lost his wife, Clara, to cancer just 2 years before. Rachel had been 15 then, a grieving teenager who wore her pain like armor. When Daniel and I started dating, I took things slow. I knew there were wounds I couldn't see, let alone heal. But Daniel had this steadiness to him. Like no matter what storm you were in, he'd find the eye and help you breathe again. I needed that. He needed someone who saw him beyond the loss. It felt right. Until Rachel entered the picture. I met her for the first time on a Saturday morning over pancakes. Daniel thought breakfast would soften the moment. Rachel showed up in black jeans, a tight ponytail, and an expression that told me pancakes weren't going to fix anything. She shook my hand like it was a formality she was forced to endure. Didn't make eye contact. I tried to make conversation. She gave me one-word answers. Eventually she looked at Daniel and said, "Are we done now?" Like it was a dentist appointment. He winced. I stayed silent. And that set the tone for the next 20 years. We married the following spring. Rachel didn't attend the wedding. She said she was busy. Daniel tried to mask the pain, but I saw it in his shoulders, in the way he folded his vows into his suit pocket like he was already carrying disappointment. Still, we built a life, quietly, carefully. She moved out at 19 and rarely came back. We sent birthday cards, gifts, holiday invitations. Most went unanswered. When she did show up, it was brief and brittle. She'd hug Daniel, avoid my gaze, compliment the decor, and leave before dessert. She never addressed me directly unless absolutely necessary. And Daniel, God bless him, always tried to pretend it was normal. But I knew. I was tolerated, not accepted. Still, I hoped time would soften her. We were cordial at family gatherings. She never yelled or caused a scene. But there was always a wall, a boundary she never let me cross. She got married at 25, didn't invite me. Daniel went alone. He brought back photos and stories, but I could tell it had wounded him deeply. "She's just still processing," he said. 25 years old and still processing? I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only kindness you have left. When Daniel's health began to decline, things changed. Slowly at first. A little forgetfulness, misplacing things, missing appointments. Then came the diagnosis. Early onset Alzheimer's. I stood in that cold doctor's office and felt the bottom drop out from under my life. Rachel came to the hospital. She was distant, but more present than she'd been in years. For a brief moment I thought maybe, just maybe, this shared grief would draw us together. I was wrong. The following weeks became a silent tug-of-war. Decisions about care, medications, legal documents. She questioned every move I made. "I just want what's best for my father," she said once, her tone sharp like a blade tucked behind the words. "As do I replied. She didn't believe me. She never had. Over the next 2 years, I was Daniel's full-time caregiver. Rachel visited but never stayed long. She'd kiss his cheek, bring him books he no longer recognized, and leave after an hour or two. "I can't watch him fade like this," she once told me, eyes dry. So I watched instead. I bathed him, fed him, held him through the confusion and the fear. And when he forgot my name and called me "that nice lady," I smiled and said, "I'm right here," because I was, always. He passed on a Tuesday morning in his sleep. Peacefully, they said. But there was nothing peaceful about the silence that followed. Rachel handled the obituary. Didn't mention me. Not once. It read as if Daniel had lived alone after Clara passed. I didn't fight her. I had no energy left. Grief has a way of pulling your bones inward. All I wanted was space to breathe. But Rachel wasn't done. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail. Rachel was getting remarried. It was a beautiful cream envelope with elegant lettering and gold accents, the kind of invite people frame. And inside, in perfect script, it read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Rachel Elizabeth Whitmore and Thomas James Alcott." My name was nowhere on the envelope. Not Mom, not Abigail. Just it to the household of Daniel Whitmore. The return address? Rachel and Clara Whitmore. As if I'd never existed. As if the last 20 years had been an inconvenient dream she was now waking up from. I sat at the table for a long time, invitation in hand, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or tear it in two. Instead, I set it down. and poured a glass of wine. The next day I called her. "Hello?" she answered, curt as ever. "Got the invitation," I said. Silence. Then, "Oh, lovely design. Thomas picked it. Do you want me to come?" A beat. I assumed you wouldn't. I exhaled slowly. "Rachel, I was married to your father for 20 years. I was by his side until the very end." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." She didn't reply. I continued, "I'm not asking for your love. I gave up on that a long time ago. But I deserve to be treated like I was a part of his life." "You were a part of his afterlife," she snapped, "not the one that mattered." And with that, she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the silence pressing in around me like fog, and something inside me cracked. Not from grief, not from anger, from clarity. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about truth. And I was done letting it be rewritten without my name in it. The morning after Rachel hung up on me, I sat at the kitchen table staring at her wedding invitation again. Part of me wanted to burn it. Another part, maybe the one still holding on to hope, considered RSVPing yes just to make a statement. But in the end, I did something much simpler. I wrote a letter. Not angry, not defensive, just honest. "Dear Rachel, I won't pretend we ever had the kind of relationship people write books about. But I loved your father, and he loved you more than anything in this world. I was there when he forgot how to say your name, and I was there when he whispered it in his sleep. He never stopped loving you, not for a second. And he would have wanted me at your wedding, not to replace your mother, but to witness the joy he wished for you every day. I'll respect your choice. But I needed you to know I showed up for him, and I would show up for you too, if you let me. Abigail." I sealed it, placed it in a cream envelope to match her invitation, and dropped it in the mailbox. Then I went on with my life. Or at least I tried. A week later, I was cleaning out Daniel's study, sorting papers, boxing up old books, when I found something tucked behind a drawer. It was a leather-bound journal with delicate handwriting across the front page. Clara Whitmore. I froze. I hadn't expected to find anything of hers. Daniel had packed up most of Clara's belongings long before I came into his life. But this journal, this felt like it had been hidden. Not forgotten, tucked away. I debated opening it. But curiosity and something deeper won. The entries spanned the last year of Clara's life. Some were mundane, grocery lists, appointments. Others were raw, descriptions of chemotherapy, letters she never sent to Rachel. But one entry stopped me cold. "Daniel is stronger than he knows, and one day he'll find love again. I hope he does. I hope he's not alone. I hope Rachel won't hate her. Whoever she is, be gentle with her, my girl. It takes great courage to love a man who has already given his heart away once." I closed the journal, hands trembling. Then I made a decision. I called Rachel. She didn't answer. So I texted, "There's something of your mom's I think you should see. It's important." No reply. But the next day she was at my door. No smile, no greeting, just, "What did you find?" I handed her the journal. "She wrote about you," I said, "and about me." Rachel looked wary, but she opened the cover. The moment she saw her mother's handwriting, something in her face cracked. She didn't cry, but she sat down. "And read." For almost 20 minutes she said nothing. Then she closed the journal and stared at the floor. "She really wanted you to be okay." I nodded. She did. "And she forgave him for loving someone after her. She wanted him to." Rachel exhaled. It wasn't relief. It was release. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You can come to the wedding, but don't expect to sit with family." It wasn't a warm invitation, but it wasn't a door slammed in my face either. It was something, and something was more than I'd had for 20 years. The wedding was held in the garden of a historic estate just outside the city. It was elegant, floral, understated, very Rachel. I wore a navy blue dress, simple jewelry, and sat in the back row. I didn't expect to be acknowledged. I was there for closure. But as the ceremony began, something unexpected happened. The officiant stepped forward. "In memory of those who could not be here with us," she said, "we light this candle." An attendant brought it forward, and we acknowledged their presence in our hearts, Clara Whitmore and Daniel Whitmore. 2 names, 1 candle, 1 shared flame. I felt my breath catch. Then Rachel turned her head, just slightly, and looked at me, just for a second. But in that glance was something I hadn't seen in years. Not love, not even respect, but recognition of my place, of my presence, of my story. After the ceremony, I prepared to slip out quietly. But before I reached the exit, someone touched my arm. It was Rachel. She didn't smile, but her voice was soft when she said, "Thanks for coming." I nodded. "I'm glad you let me." She hesitated, then added, "I read more of the journal. I thought you might." She talked about you like you were already there, before you even existed. I think she knew what Daniel needed. Rachel swallowed hard. I didn't make it easy for you. You were grieving. So were you. Silence. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. And I realized something. I wasn't just there for closure. I was there to begin again. After the wedding, I expected silence, the kind that follows a long-awaited ending. A funeral. A goodbye you finally stop whispering in your sleep. But the silence that came wasn't cold. It was spacious, like my life had opened up, not because something was gone, but because I was still here. And for the first time in years, I started thinking about what I wanted. Not what Daniel needed, not what Rachel would tolerate. What I wanted. The house was too quiet, of course. I had kept Daniel's study untouched since he passed, but one morning I walked in, opened the blinds, and started sorting. I donated his books to the library, framed a few old photographs, packed away the rest. I kept one thing on the desk, his watch. It no longer worked. But every time I passed it, I felt like he was still gently reminding me to stay present, to keep moving forward, minute by minute. And I did. Rachel surprised me 3 weeks later. She called. I've been thinking, she said. My heart fluttered, waiting for the inevitable sting. I don't have much family left. I stayed silent. She continued, and Thomas, he asked me why I didn't have a mother figure at the wedding. I let out a slow breath. I told him it was complicated. That's fair, I said softly. But then I showed him Mom's journal. My chest tightened. He said she sounded like someone who could love 2 people at once. I smiled. She did. Rachel paused. Would you like to come over for dinner next week? I nearly dropped the phone. I'd love that, I said. And I meant it. Dinner was simple. Grilled chicken, salad, roasted potatoes. We didn't talk about the past, not really. Instead, we talked about her job, her new house, the dog they were thinking of adopting. I brought a bottle of wine and a photo of Daniel smiling on the beach, hair wild in the wind, sunglasses crooked. He loved that stupid hat, Rachel said. I hated it, I laughed. And then, without warning, she reached for my hand. Thank you, she said, for staying, even when I pushed you away. I didn't stay because I expected anything, I said. I stayed because I loved your father, and I hoped one day you'd see that. I do, she said. I really do. Something shifted after that night. She started calling every few weeks. She invited me to brunch with her friends once, introduced me as family. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. Because I finally understood, family isn't always about titles. Sometimes it's about survival, and forgiveness, and showing up even when you're not asked to, especially then. I joined a book club, started volunteering at a literacy center, made a few new friends, women my age who'd also loved and lost and learned how to rebuild. They didn't care that I was a step anything. They just saw me as me. And for the first time in years, I did too. One afternoon, Rachel called and asked if she could stop by. When she arrived, she was carrying a large envelope. I've been thinking about Mom's journal, she said. I still read parts of it. Same, I smiled. She handed me the envelope. I found a letter addressed to you. My breath caught. I thought I had everything, I said. It was in the lining of her old coat. I almost missed it. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. Dear Abigail, if Daniel ever finds you, I hope he's lucky enough to hold on. I know you'll feel guilty, like you're intruding, but you're not. He's a man worth loving, and he's better when he's loved. Be patient with Rachel. She sees the world in black and white, but life is every shade in between. And you? You're stronger than you know. Thank you for taking care of my family, and for becoming part of it. With gratitude, Clara. I didn't realize I was crying until Rachel passed me a tissue. She believed in you, Rachel said. I nodded. I think I'm starting to believe in me, too. She smiled. I'm glad, because I could use someone like you around. Spring came early that year. The daffodils in the front garden bloomed in full yellow bursts. The wind carried the smell of jasmine through the open windows. And for the first time in a long while, I found myself waking up without the weight of something unresolved on my chest. I used to think healing would look like a big, dramatic moment, a tearful apology, a scene worthy of the final page in a novel. But what I got instead were little things. A photo from Rachel of their new puppy. A voicemail saying she was thinking of me. A card on Mother's Day that simply read, "Thank you for everything." No signature, just that sentence. And it was enough. I started spending my mornings on the porch, coffee in one hand, book in the other, Daniel's old blanket across my lap. The sun would filter through the trees in soft golden light, and I'd sit there, listening to the birds, thinking of all the lives I'd lived in this one single lifetime. The young woman who didn't think she deserved love. The wife who stood beside a man while he slowly forgot her name. The stepmother who never got a seat at the table. And the woman now, still standing, still soft, but stronger than she'd ever been. Rachel and I didn't become best friends overnight, but we became something real. She called me when she got a promotion. I called her when I needed help setting up a new shelf, We laughed over dinner once about how Daniel would have teased us both endlessly for getting emotional over IKEA furniture. And somewhere in those ordinary moments, the gap between us narrowed. It didn't disappear, but it wasn't a canyon anymore. It was a step, and we were walking it together. One Sunday, she came by with Thomas. They brought croissants and sat on the porch with me for hours. At one point, Rachel looked around the yard and said, "You've really made this place yours." I smiled. "Took me long enough." Thomas chimed in. "She even put us to shame with the roses. Ours looked like they gave up on life." We all laughed. It felt easy, natural, the kind of laughter that only happens when no one's pretending anymore. That night, I pulled out my own journal, one I'd started just after Daniel passed. The first pages were full of pain, of uncertainty, of questions I didn't think I'd ever get answers to. But the later pages, those were different. They held moments like these: croissants and rose gardens, porch conversations and second chances. And I wrote something I hadn't written before. I think I'm finally home, not because someone made space for me, but because I claimed it myself. Later that summer, Rachel invited me to her baby shower. She was glowing, radiant. The guest list was long, the food was catered, the decorations were Pinterest perfect. And when it was time for the advice cards, someone handed me a pen. I stared at the blank space for a long time. Then I wrote, "Love without expectation. Stay even when it's hard, and always make space for forgiveness. It blooms where you least expect it." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. She'd know. The baby came in the fall. A little girl named Clara Abigail. When Rachel told me, I cried, and for the first time she cried with me. We held each other in that hospital room, surrounded by machines and soft baby breath, and the ghosts of the women who had loved this family before us. And in that moment, I knew something to be true deep in my bones. We don't always get to choose how people see us, but we do get to choose how we show up, over and over again. And eventually, the truth of who we are speaks louder than the stories others try to write in our place. Today, when I hold little Clara in my arms, I whisper stories of the women she comes from. Of Clara the strong, of Rachel the fierce, and of a woman named Abigail, who loved through silence, through rejection, and through years of being unseen, until one day, love looked back and said, "I see you now." And that was enough. That was everything.